Let me start this video with a very brief story time segment. When I was a kid, I had this story that, for a long time, was very special to me. Well, actually, I had two. The first involved the main character going on an adventure around the world to save her people from the dark forces threatening to destroy it. The other was about a group of high school students who had to keep the otherworldly forces of evil at bay while searching for an object that had the power to destroy and rewrite entire worlds. As much as I had fun developing these stories over the years, I never got around to finishing them, but occasionally I'd get the idea to give them the remakes or the improvements they deserved. And when I was in college, one of my classmates actually had the same dilemma. However, it was then that the teacher gave some advice that surprised me and a few other people in the class. He said to let the story go. Into the abyss. Looking back, I can see why he said it, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you have to throw out every aspect of your old stories never to be seen again. Now, I will be drawing on my own experiences with recycling my old story ideas, and having a very active imagination. I had lots of them. Well, I still do. Quite a few of my old ideas from middle and high school have made their way into my newer stories, and I recently got the motivation to give one of the older stories I mentioned in the beginning a fresh coat of paint. Is this a prelude/teaser of the content of my next video? I am not currently at liberty to answer that. Even though I am for the most part going to be talking about my own experiences because they're the experiences I'm most familiar with, hopefully this can be helpful to you if for whatever reason you're in a bit of a pickle with developing your story or your characters and you're not sure what to do with them. If you're new here and you want to see me defend old story ideas with not necessarily my life, but maybe my pasta, and you want to know why keeping those old story ideas can work in your favor, then make sure to like and subscribe. And strap your butts in, because here we go! I'm sure at least most of us here had stories we wrote and loved writing when we were kids. Sure, they usually turned out cringe and made little, if any, sense, but to be fair, we were kids. I think we should be allowed to be cringe storytellers at that age. Throughout my childhood, I had many story ideas come and go. All of them were either action, fantasy, sci-fi, or a combination of the three because those were my favorite genres and still are. But I don't remember finishing any of them. However, as I would develop the ideas for new stories that I felt had potential, I would transfer characters and several plot elements from other story ideas that I had. Around 2008, when I was 10 or so, I came up with probably the first major story I ever put out. The Tale of Samara. No relation to the girl from The Ring. It was meant to be a sweeping epic fantasy, at least it was in my head, about the princess of a small kingdom who had to go on a quest to stop the main villain and his army, who would not only seek to destroy her kingdom, but plunge the world into darkness. I remember it being the coolest thing I had ever thought up, even though it was a shameless rip-off of things I enjoyed and stuff I thought was cool. And not only that, the whole story was a mess. The main character gained magical abilities, kept getting caught in life-threatening situations, including but absolutely not limited to repeatedly falling into bodies of water, leading a group of more than 1,000 of her allies into a fierce battle against the main villains, returning home to find out her kingdom has been destroyed and her childhood friend slain, changing physical form several times, and gaining immortality. And that was just in the first book. Again, I was 10, don't bully me please. I wrote 14 chapters in total across 3 books. I actually made it to chapter 15, which was meant to be the last chapter, but I lost motivation about halfway through that chapter. But the story never left my mind fully, even as the years progressed, and I spent several years wondering how I could refurbish it. In 2013, all of this on and off brainstorming culminated in a story with a similar premise, but with a more science fiction-like angle, this time called The Tale of Saia. In this iteration, the main character, now called Saia, but still heir to the throne of her kingdom, was assigned to track down and defeat the main villain with the help of some childhood friends, one of which was a girl named Talia. Where Saia was a stoic, calm, and level-headed character, Talia was a cheerful and optimistic girl who, looking back, definitely balanced the main group out in terms of personality. Unfortunately, The Tale of Saia, in comparison to its predecessor, was tragically short-lived. And it seemed so were its characters. But wait. There's a plot twist. In early 2021, I was crafting up the main cast for what would become my current webcomic project, The Reverent Silence, which I've talked about numerous times on this channel as part of my epic advertising campaign train. Trademark. I already had my main group of protagonists all set around this time, but I still needed some villains. It must have been sometime in the spring when development for the story was really taking off when a very old memory resurfaced. Specifically, the memory of the existence of one Talia Steele. To be honest, I don't really remember why Talia stuck out in my mind instead of Saia and Alcyone, who were the two other main characters in the Tale of Saia, but there was this, I guess you could say, itch in my brain that I knew could only be scratched if I could figure out what to do with Talia and how to repurpose her for the Reverent Silence. In January, I uploaded a video formally introducing Talia, and as a rundown for everyone who's new here, or who perhaps didn't see that video, Talia's current incarnation is virtually the opposite of who she was in 2013. Although that's after several design changes that were closer to her original design, including turning her into a cat girl. In the world of the Reverent Silence, a lot of people have animal-like traits or traits borrowed from mythological creatures like dragons for world-building reasons that would take too long to explain, and low-key requires its own video. So in accordance with that concept, I gave Talia the traits of the European wildcat. If I remember correctly, she had the traits of a calico cat at first, but I'm a lot happier with the current design. The personality of the current Talia, in particular, is also a complete 180 from her original version. She's a lot more serious and harsh, and probably will destroy her boss's enemies while sipping on her tea like it's a normal Tuesday afternoon. And come to think of it, I think new Talia is the same as old Talia in name only. I mean, she did keep her original name, but that's neither here nor there. But Talia wasn't the only character to get this treatment. Of the four main protagonists of the Reverent Silence, two of them were from previous story ideas that I had. The other two were created specifically for the story. In the beginning of 2014, I came up with a supernatural mystery called The Garden of Monochrome Lilies. I have mentioned the story in passing on the channel, but it was a very throw stuff at the wall and steal what sticks kind of story, where the villain's calling card would be a series of lilies arranged in a distinct formation. And believe it or not, I actually started writing the first chapter, and then promptly lost steam. To be honest, I was pretty ambivalent about it even then, so I think that was what contributed to me losing steam as quickly as I did. I don't even remember what the villain's name was. However, there was one character that stood out. The main character, an unassuming fellow named Peter. I didn't have much of his backstory fleshed out, but I did draw him once to get his design down, and I remember my brain just buzzing with ideas that never fully came into fruition. But when the Garden of Monochrome Lilies got yeeted into the abyss for 7 years, so did Peter. Well, okay, he's probably the only thing about that story that I chose to salvage from the abyss and transplant into the Reverent Silence. The other main character that I took from the Vault of Old Ideas was Lark, who looked very, very different from their original incarnation. Like Talia, Lark is very different from their original incarnation, having only kept their name. Even though I have talked about Lark's origin story in detail, I forgot to bring up the fact that they were originally one of the main characters of an urban fantasy involving vampires. Vampires? Vampires. Anyway. But when that story fell through, I think you can guess where I'm going with this one. When I brought Lark back from the Vault of Old Ideas a year or so later, I pretty much did away with their old concept entirely and gave them a completely new one. For the sake of transparency, I want to mention that even though the current Lark is, technically speaking, half Egyptian and half Irish, and was born in a country analogous to late period Egypt, the original iteration of Lark was a pasty white vampire boy from 14th century England. Up until a few years ago, there wasn't much diversity in the cast of my stories, and I think a large part of it was because of the very white environment I grew up in, along with the media I consumed. Okay, yes, I was a kid, but sometimes you gotta say, this ain't it, Chief. Representation is cool. In this house, we diversify our casts. Actually, much of the cast of my webcomic, not just Lark, comes from diverse backgrounds, but that's a topic that would take this video way off course. That being said though, I always strive to do thorough research on any cultures or customs that I'm unfamiliar with, so I can incorporate them to the best of my ability where applicable. It may not be perfect 100% of the time, my apologies in advance, but I will continue to do my best. I have talked about the rest of the creation process for the new version of Lark on the channel before, so I'm not going back to the Department of Redundancy and boring you with all the details, but to make a long story short, I leaned into a sort of seafaring aquatic concept for Lark. His last name is Galleon, so it only felt right. While Lark initially had the traits of the spear-toothed shark, I decided to switch it up because I wasn't satisfied with the direction it was going in, and instead I modeled their design on the blue glaucus, and I'm very happy with the outcome. Unlike Lark, I actually stuck with Pieter's old design in some capacity. Well, the color scheme specifically. But as with Lark and Talia, I played around with Pieter's design to see how he could blend into the 1890s steampunkish world of the Reverent Silence. I took inspiration from formal wear and those magicians with the bow ties and the top hats and everything, but in keeping in line with a good portion of the population having animal-like traits, I decided to give Pieter the traits of the red-backed shrike. He's also half-elf, but honestly, he's more bird than elf. But nevertheless, that is the tale of how Pieter became Pieter. I can say with confidence that the decision to incorporate old ideas into my webcomic worked very well for me here, because honestly, even though the 3 characters I mentioned may have been crafted for older stories, they all fit much better in the Reverent Silence. It's been fun seeing how they interact with the rest of the cast, and I have grander visions and ideas for their character arcs and where I want to take them as the story progresses than I did when they were still part of their original stories. It's here that I should probably mention, it's always good to assess how you can refurbish your old ideas. Those old story drafts or notes, especially if you came up with them in your childhood, might not be up to scratch, and that's fine. If anything, it's a matter of seeing what you can keep or change to make your old characters fit your new story where applicable, or how you can modify the plot points of your old stories to fit the narrative of your newer stories. A 2016 article from Standout Books goes into depth about recycling story ideas and how it might actually be beneficial to hoard your old ideas before adding. Just as painters will often repurpose used canvases, there's nothing stopping you from choosing to recycle writing ideas into newer, fresher material. However, the article also poses several questions to the reader, primarily, why this idea? Well, okay, sometimes my decisions are more intuitive than they are logical, but in regards to plot points specifically, I usually choose old plot-related ideas that I feel could help me get out of any blocks I'm experiencing in regards to story progression. Could the story and the progression of the plot benefit in some way from this old idea? If the answer is yes, I appreciate the tangerine, for it is entire, and find a way to sneak it into the new story. If the tangerine is missing an atom, I put it to the side for later. I want to go back to the tale of Samara for a bit, because there are a lot of plot points from that story that crossed over into what were, at the time, my newer projects. In 2017, several years after the tale of Samara came into being, I drafted the plot for a story that would later become a fantasy novel that I'm currently working on. Even though the plot of that novel now is very different from what it once was, I mean, the cast especially got a major overhaul, a lot of the prototype plot, if you will, was borrowed in some way from Book 1 of the Tale of Samara. Thanks in part to all the memories I scrounged up from my childhood, since the original documents from 2008 have all been lost to time. Even so, that outline acted as a springboard for what would become the novel's fully fleshed out and refined plot that formed as the years passed. I'd say only about 40 to 50% of the 2017 outline made its way into the final outline, but I have to give the 2017 outline credit because there's a chance I would have been lost without it. If you watched my sketchbook tour back in March, you may recall that I used to have a story called 26, which I worked on throughout middle and high school, and it's the second story I mentioned at the beginning of this video. It was this magical girl-esque tale about a group of 8 girls who had to defeat otherworldly alien-like beings while simultaneously finding and protecting a crystalline object that had the ability to rewrite the universe. Admittedly, like the tale of Samara, it was pretty heavily ripped off of stuff that I liked at the time. But it did gain some semblance of originality and a much grander scope in the later years of its existence. In, I think, 2012, which was when I had one of the first major shifts in my art style, I even made a PowerPoint presentation giving a brief rundown of the plot, the main characters, and the main villains, and also some world building. And as cringe as the story itself was, again, heavy rip-off of stuff that I liked at the time, and also I was a kid, I'm so glad I held on to that PowerPoint. And I am just as glad that I kept my sketchbook with all of the drawings I made of the main cast. In recent months, I've begun the process of refurbishing 26 and modifying what I can to turn it into a more refined product. The story had a darker angle to it, along with some existential ruminations on the side, and I definitely want to keep those in because I love me some angst. I also want to keep the whole dedicated organization full of people with elemental powers fighting evil bit, but there's so much that I want to change as well. For example, I want to change the designs of the main cast, using their old designs as a sort of base, the general progression of the story itself and the setting, and much, much more. The new version of 26 is in the primordial soup stages of existence as of now, but I'm very excited to see where it goes. However, I also want to keep the story from following any recurring themes presently in my writing as much as I can. Going back to the Standout Books article, there's a difference between recycling and repetition, and the article says it's one you should be wary of. The article also says that if the themes you tend to use are repeated too often or are too unaltered, there's a chance you could come off as predictable. A new way to present an old idea is fine, but if you don't make significant changes, repetition will become an issue. And I agree with that. I've noticed several recurring themes or plot points in my writing that I'm doing my best to rectify, and again, I don't want the new version of 26 to fall into that trap because that would be bad. That would be very bad. In conclusion, recycling writing ideas can be a great thing to do if you're ever in the middle of writer's block or have no idea what to do with the story you're currently writing, or even if you need another character to round out your cast. It saved me multiple times over the years, and I've actually done this a lot more times than I mentioned in the video, and I even have several older characters that I want to give a proper story, but I don't want to make this video longer than it needs to be. Recycling ideas can also help you assess themes, settings, and characters, and may occasionally give you insight on how you approach your work along with the themes and genres that may interest you. And who knows, they might even be the foundation for your magnum opus. So consider retrieving your old ideas from the void today. It may help you in the long run. Anyhow, that is going to do it for this video. Hopefully this video was helpful in some capacity, because otherwise I'm probably going to cry in my tub. If you liked this video and you want to see more art-related videos and shenanigans from me, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I post new videos every other Friday, usually about drawing, but sometimes I'll talk about other stuff as well. If you want to support me further, please check out my other social media accounts as well as my Ko-fi and my Etsy shop, which are all in the description. And lastly, if you made it this far, leave a coconut emoji in the comment section below. And remember to keep things civil in the comments, or I will put a whoopee cushion in your chair when you least expect it. And yeah, that's about everything. Thanks for watching.